My daughter's house will be perfect for the baby. My mom announced at dinner when she decided my debt-ridden brother and his pregnant wife would move into my home. I just smiled and asked, when are they moving in? 21 days later, when they all stood in front of the house with a moving truck full of belongings, I had a big surprise waiting for them. I've spent my entire life being the family's safety net but never their priority. Growing up as Michelle Porter, the reliable daughter, the little adult as my mother always called me, meant watching from the sidelines while my older brother Mason basked in the spotlight of our parents' undivided attention. From the moment I can remember forming coherent thoughts, I understood my place in our family's hierarchy. Mason first, everyone else second, Michelle somewhere after the family dog. This wasn't something I realized suddenly. It was a slow, painful awakening that unfolded across thousands of tiny moments throughout my childhood. Like the Christmas when I was 8 and Mason was 11. I'd been begging for a new bike for months, dropping hints, leaving bicycle catalogs open to specific pages, even writing a letter to Santa with only one item on it. On Christmas morning, there it was, a gleaming new mountain bike with custom decals and shock absorbers. Except it wasn't under my side of the tree. It was Mason's name on the tag. Mason's outgrown his old bike, Mom explained as she watched my face fall. You can have his hand-me-down. It's practically new. It wasn't practically new. The seat was worn, the handlebars had lost most of their rubber grips, and the chain slipped every few pedals. But I nodded and smiled because that's what Michelle did: understand, accommodate, accept. When Mason made the JV basketball team in 9th grade, my parents rearranged their entire work schedules to attend every single game. They'd sit in the bleachers wearing matching t-shirts with his jersey number, waving foam fingers and cheering even when he spent most of the game on the bench. That same year, I qualified for the state debate championship after months of preparation and late-night practice sessions. "We're so sorry, honey," Dad said, not quite meeting my eyes. "Mason has a scrimmage that day. You understand, right? You're so good at these things anyway, you don't need us there the way Mason needs the support." I did understand. I understood perfectly. When I made honor roll 4 years straight in high school, my mother taped the certificate to the refrigerator for exactly 3 days before it was replaced by Mason's C+ in English, his first passing grade that semester. "We need to encourage him," she said when I found my certificate crumpled in the recycling bin. "You're already so successful, Michelle. You've always been our little adult." Little adult. Code for, we don't have to worry about you, so we don't. While Mason dropped out of the state college they'd paid for in full after just 3 semesters, claiming the academic environment was stifling his creativity, I worked 2 jobs to put myself through school. I earned scholarships. I graduated with honors in finance. I landed a solid job at Peterson Financial Consulting and slowly worked my way up from junior analyst to consultant. By 27, I had saved enough for a down payment on a modest 3-bedroom house in a decent neighborhood with tree-lined streets and neighbors who waved when I collected my mail. Nothing fancy, but it was mine. Every mortgage payment, every repair, every piece of furniture, all earned through my own hard work. No family loans, no parental co-signers, just me. Meanwhile, Mason and his wife Vanessa bounced from one financial disaster to another like it was their favorite sport. Mason cycled through jobs with alarming regularity: sales associate at the electronics store, fired for consistently late arrivals, assistant manager at the sporting goods place, let go during cutbacks, freelance graphic designer, abandoned when it required too much client handholding, cryptocurrency investor. The less said about the catastrophe, the better. Vanessa's shopping addiction didn't help matters. Designer purses, shoes that cost more than my monthly car payment, and constant home decor upgrades for their overpriced rental apartment stretched their already precarious finances to the breaking point. But the coup de grace was Mason's brilliant decision to sink $10,000, borrowed from our parents, into a cryptocurrency that was showing promising early returns according to some podcast host he followed religiously. Through it all, my parents kept enabling him, draining their retirement accounts, taking out second mortgages, and when their own finances grew strained from supporting him, they'd turn to me. "Just a small loan," my father would say, his voice casual but his eyes not quite meeting mine. "You know Mason's going through a rough patch. It's temporary." Those small loans, $500 here, $1,200 there, never got repaid. I kept a spreadsheet, partly out of financial prudence and partly as a silent record of my family's exploitation. Over 5 years, I had loaned my brother over $15,000, money I knew I'd never see again. My extended family wasn't blind to the pattern. At family gatherings, the comments would start innocently enough. "So generous of you to help your brother out again," my Aunt Carolyn would say, eyebrow raised over her wine glass. Family should always stick together, right? My Uncle Frank was less subtle. Must be nice having a sister with deep pockets, he'd say to Mason right in front of me, then laugh like he'd made a clever joke instead of identifying financial abuse. Still, I kept showing up, Sunday dinners, holiday gatherings, the occasional weeknight dinner when Mom would call and say, "It's been too long since we've seen you." I'd arrive after a 10-hour workday to find Mason and Vanessa already there, feet up on the coffee table, helping themselves to the beer I'd brought last time, regaling my parents with tales of their latest misfortune or half-baked career pivot. I look back now and wonder why I put up with it for so long. Stockholm Syndrome, maybe. Or the desperate hope that someday they'd see me, really see me, and realize what they'd been doing all these years. Validation is a hell of a drug, and I was an addict waiting for my next fix. Then came the dinner that changed everything. I arrived at my parents' house on a Thursday evening in October, exhausted after closing a major account at work. The presentation had gone well, but I'd been up until 3 a.m. the night before finalizing the numbers, and all I wanted was to go home, pour a glass of wine, and sink into a hot bath. But Mom had called that morning, her voice carrying that particular note of guilt-inducing sweetness she used when she wanted something. "It's been ages since we've had a family dinner," she'd said. "I'm making lasagna, your favorite." That should have been my first clue something was up. My favorite meals only appeared when there was an agenda. Mason's car was in the driveway when I arrived, along with Vanessa's leased BMW X5, a vehicle they definitely couldn't afford on Mason's sporadic income from his latest venture as a social media consultant. The smell of Mom's lasagna filled the house as I stepped through the door. Dad greeted me with a quick hug before returning to the baseball game blaring from the TV. Mason and Vanessa were already seated at the dining table, Mason nursing a beer while Vanessa scrolled through her phone. "There she is," Mason said without getting up. "The corporate sellout." It was his standard greeting, a not-so-subtle dig at my conventional career path. I'd long ago stopped pointing out the irony that my selling out was what kept him afloat when his bold entrepreneurial dreams inevitably crashed and burned. "Hey, Mace," I replied, setting down the bottle of wine I'd brought. "Vanessa." Vanessa looked up briefly from her phone. "Oh my God, Michelle, I love that blouse. Is it from the Nordstrom sale? I just bought the most amazing cashmere sweater there yesterday." I didn't bother mentioning that my blouse was from Target and was already 3 years old. In Vanessa's world, if it wasn't designer or on trend, it might as well be invisible, much like me. Dinner started normally enough. My mother's lasagna was delicious as always, the garlic bread perfectly toasted. Mason dominated the conversation with tales of his latest business idea, house flipping, because apparently watching HGTV had made him an expert in real estate investment and renovation. "It's all about location and having the vision to see a property's potential," he explained, as if he was sharing groundbreaking wisdom instead of regurgitating catchphrases from Flip or Flop. "The returns can be insane if you know what you're doing." My parents nodded enthusiastically at everything he said, occasionally glancing at me as if seeking confirmation. I kept quiet, focusing on my food and mentally calculating how early I could leave without seeming rude. Vanessa showed off her new Louis Vuitton purse, which I knew cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. "It's an investment piece," she insisted when no one commented. "The resale value on these just keeps going up." I was halfway through my second glass of wine when my mother cleared her throat, setting down her fork with a deliberate motion that signaled a serious discussion was about to begin. "So," she began, glancing at my father for support, "we've been talking about Mason and Vanessa's situation." My stomach clenched automatically. Here it comes, I thought, another loan request. I mentally reviewed my bank balance, calculating how much I could spare without dipping into my emergency fund. I'd just paid property taxes and had a plumbing repair scheduled next week, so my cushion was thinner than usual. "They've been having such a hard time since the landlord raised their rent," my mother continued, her voice taking on the soothing tone she used when she knew she was asking too much. "And with the baby coming." "Wait. Baby?" This was news to me. I looked at Vanessa, who unconsciously placed a hand on her still flat stomach, a small smile playing at her lips. "You're pregnant?" I asked, feeling stupid for missing what was apparently common knowledge. 12 weeks, Vanessa replied, her expression a mixture of pride and defiance. "We wanted to wait until we were out of the first trimester to tell everyone, but we told your parents last week when we discussed our situation." My mind raced. A baby would explain why they'd been especially strapped for cash lately. It would also explain the pointed questions my mother had been asking about my spare bedrooms when she'd visited last month. "So, we figured out a solution," my mother finished, her voice breezy and light as if what she was about to say was perfectly reasonable. They'll be moving into your house next month. You can take the smaller bedroom or move back in with us temporarily." The fork froze halfway to my mouth. My stomach plummeted like I just hit the first drop on a roller coaster. I looked around the table, waiting for someone to say they were joking, for the punchline to this absurd statement. No one was laughing. "My house," I finally managed, the words feeling foreign in my mouth. "It makes perfect sense," my father jumped in, leaning forward with the earnest expression he used when trying to close a sale at his job. "Your place has 3 bedrooms. You don't need all that space for just yourself. Plus," Vanessa added, already scrolling through her phone to show me something, "I found the perfect nursery furniture set that would fit perfectly in that front bedroom with a bay window." My bay window? In my house? That I paid for. "This way you won't have to worry about maintaining such a big place all by yourself," my mother said, reaching over to pat my hand as if she'd just done me an enormous favor. "It's really the most practical solution for everyone." They weren't asking. They were telling. They'd made this decision without me, as if my home, the one I'd worked 60-hour weeks to afford, the one I'd painted and furnished and turned into my sanctuary, was community property. As if I were community property. In that moment, something inside me finally snapped. The last thread of obligation, the last desperate hope that they might someday see me as a person with my own needs and boundaries, it severed clean, leaving behind a cold clarity I'd never experienced before. I forced a smile, took another sip of wine to give myself a moment. "Sure, that makes sense. When were you thinking they'd move in?" The relief around the table was palpable. My mother's shoulders relaxed. My father nodded approvingly. Mason and Vanessa exchanged victorious glances. "We were thinking the first of the month," Mason said, already pulling out his phone to make notes. "That gives you about 3 weeks to get things organized," he said, organized as if I were a personal assistant being given a straightforward task rather than a human being evicted from my own home. 3 weeks. They were giving me 3 weeks to surrender my life. "Perfect," I said, taking another large sip of wine to hide the tremor in my hands. "I'll start packing this weekend." The rest of dinner passed in a blur. I nodded at appropriate intervals, smiled when expected, and died a little inside each time Vanessa mentioned another piece of my house she planned to change. The guest bathroom would need to be remodeled to accommodate a changing table. The home office would make a perfect playroom eventually. My carefully cultivated garden would need to be child-proofed, of course, perhaps just removed entirely to make room for a proper swing set. When I finally got into my car to drive home, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the steering wheel. Tears burned hot trails down my cheeks as I pulled away from my parents' house. I made it only a few blocks before I had to pull over, unable to see through the blur of rage and heartbreak. I sat there, engine running, streetlights casting orange shadows across my dashboard, and screamed until my throat was raw. I screamed for the little girl who'd always come second, for the teenager who'd learned to celebrate her accomplishments alone, for the adult who'd worked so hard to build something only to have it casually appropriated for someone else. Then I took a deep breath, wiped my eyes, and made a decision. If they wanted my house so badly, they could have it, but it wouldn't be the way they expected. My company had offered me a promotion 2 months earlier, senior consultant with a 35% salary increase and enhanced benefits package. The catch? I'd need to relocate to our Chicago office, which was expanding its client base and needed experienced staff to manage the transition. I'd been hesitating, unwilling to move away from the family that, despite everything, I still felt tethered to. I'd told myself it was about staying close to my parents as they aged, about being available for family gatherings, about maintaining roots in the community where I'd grown up. The truth, which I could now see with painful clarity, was simpler. I'd been waiting for them to finally value me, to see what walking away from them would cost them. That tether had just been cut. I called my boss, Gregory, at 11:30 p.m. that night, not caring about the late hour. "Michelle?" He answered, his voice confused. "Is everything okay?" "I'll take the Chicago position," I said without preamble. There was a pause, then, "That's fantastic, Michelle," he replied, sounding surprised but pleased. "What changed your mind?" "Just re-evaluated my priorities," I said, not wanting to get into the messy details. "When can I start?" "Well, the sooner the better. The Hawkins account is floundering without leadership. How quickly can you get things arranged here?" 3 weeks, I said firmly. "I'll be there in 3 weeks." The timeline wasn't coincidental. The next morning, I called a realtor, not the one my parents knew from church, but a woman named Diane from the next town over. I'd met her at a networking event and remembered liking her direct, no-nonsense approach. "I need to sell quickly," I told her after explaining my situation in the vaguest possible terms. How soon can we list? With the current market, if we price it right, we could have offers within days, she said. I can have a photographer there tomorrow and listing photos up by Friday. Are you absolutely sure about this, Michelle? Selling a home is a major decision. I've never been more sure of anything, I replied, surprised by how true it felt. I listed my house at a competitive price, just slightly below market value to ensure a quick sale. The photos went up on Friday, showcasing my freshly painted walls, updated kitchen, and the bay window that Vanessa had already mentally filled with baby furniture. By Monday, I had 3 offers. By Wednesday, I'd accepted an all-cash offer with a 21-day close. The buyers were a young couple with excellent references and no contingencies. The timing was going to be perfect. For the next 2 weeks, I lived a double life. To my family, I was the compliant daughter preparing my house for Mason and Vanessa's arrival. I mentioned getting rid of furniture to make room for the nursery, which explained the moving boxes and packed closets. I asked about paint colors and curtain preferences. I even invited Vanessa over to plan the space. She walked through my house like she already owned it, pointing out where her sectional would go, which walls she'd paint, how she'd rip out the vegetable garden I'd lovingly tended for 2 years because it's just not my aesthetic. You should be grateful we're taking this place off your hands, she said as she measured the master bedroom windows for curtains. It's really too much house for one person. I nodded and smiled, swallowing the retort that burned in my throat. Every condescending comment, every entitled assumption made it easier to go through with my plan. Meanwhile, I was methodically dismantling my life in preparation for my escape. I transferred to a new bank, leaving just enough in my old accounts to avoid suspicion. I secured an apartment in Chicago, signing the lease electronically after a virtual tour. I redirected my mail to a P.O. box. I sold what furniture I couldn't take and packed the rest into a storage unit rented under my middle name. 3 days before closing, I took what my family believed was a business trip but was really a flight to Chicago to finalize my apartment setup and start the process of transferring my life to a new city. I came back just long enough to sign the closing papers, collect my cashier's check, and load my remaining possessions into a U-Haul. The night before I left for good, I stood in my empty living room, saying goodbye to the house that had represented so much to me: independence, achievement, security. The walls seemed to hum with memories, weekend brunches with friends, quiet evenings with a book by the fireplace, the satisfaction of painting each room exactly the colors I wanted. You were a good home, I whispered, feeling slightly ridiculous talking to an empty house but needing the closure. I hope the new owners appreciate you. I didn't leave a note for my family. There was nothing left to say. On what should have been moving day for Mason and Vanessa, I was already 300 miles away, settling into my new apartment with a view of Lake Michigan. The space was smaller than my house but modern and bright, with floor-to-ceiling windows and a tiny balcony where I planned to start a container garden in the spring. I stood alone in my new living room, listening to the unfamiliar city sounds filtering through the windows: car horns, distant L train rumblings, the steady hum of a city that didn't know or care about my family drama. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. My phone buzzed incessantly on the kitchen counter, calls and texts from my family that had started early that morning and increased in frequency and urgency as the day progressed. I imagined the scene unfolding back home. Mason and Vanessa arriving with their moving truck, perhaps my parents there to help, all of them standing confused on the front lawn as strangers carried furniture into what they'd thought was about to be Mason's new house. I pictured their faces when the new owners explained that yes, they had just purchased the house from Michelle. No, she hadn't mentioned anything about family moving in. Yes, the sale was final. No, they didn't know where she'd gone. I let myself enjoy that mental image for a full minute before silencing my phone and unpacking my first box. The calls and texts kept coming. My mother's voice messages escalated from confusion to anger to tearful pleading. Michelle, there's some confusion with your house. Call me back immediately. Michelle Elizabeth Porter, I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but this isn't funny. There's a couple saying they bought your house. Call me now. How could you do this to us? To your brother? Where are they supposed to go now? You need to call us back right now and explain yourself, young lady. Please Michelle, we can fix this, just tell us where you are. Mason and Vanessa have nowhere to go. The baby, Michelle. Think about the baby. After 2 days of this bombardment, I finally responded with a single text: the same place I was supposed to go, I guess. Figure it out. Then I blocked their numbers. It wasn't just my immediate family. The extended family cavalry arrived right on schedule. My cousin Emily, WTF Michelle? Aunt Susan is having a breakdown because of your little stunt. Call home now. Uncle Frank, you've always been jealous of Mason. This is a new low, even for you. Aunt Carolyn, your grandfather would be ashamed of your selfishness. Your mother hasn't stopped crying since you pulled this stunt, is that what you wanted? One by one, they joined my blocked list. Each deletion felt like shedding another pound of dead weight I'd been carrying for years. 2 weeks into my self-imposed exile, my former colleague Jen texted me. She wasn't close with my family, but close enough to have heard the gossip through our hometown's efficient rumor mill. So, your brother and his pregnant wife are living in your parents' basement, she wrote. Your mom's telling everyone you had some kind of mental breakdown, just thought you should know. I didn't respond, but I didn't block her either. Jen became my occasional window into the world I'd left behind, providing updates when the town gossip reached her ears. A month later, she texted again. Remember that crypto thing Mason was into? Apparently he'd put in a lot more than anyone knew. Like, a lot more. That didn't surprise me. Mason had a talent for doubling down on bad decisions, interpreting his failures not as signs to change course but as indications he hadn't committed fully enough to the original bad idea. What did surprise me was learning he'd convinced my parents to invest their retirement savings in the same scheme, promising them guaranteed returns of 40% within 6 months. My father, who prided himself on his financial acumen, had ignored every red flag in favor of blind faith in his son's investment genius. When the cryptocurrency took its first major dive, Mason had panicked. Instead of cutting his losses, he'd borrowed money from 3 different payday loan companies to buy the dip and recoup his losses. He'd also maxed out 2 credit cards in my parents' names, cards they didn't know existed until the collection agencies started calling. By month 3 of my new life, the situation had imploded completely. The cryptocurrency was revealed as an elaborate scam, its founders disappearing overnight with millions in investor funds. Mason was facing potential legal trouble for some side hustle related to the scheme that Jen wasn't clear on, but which involved recruiting other investors. My parents had taken out a second mortgage to cover his most pressing debts. Vanessa was threatening to leave him, pregnant and all. I felt a twinge of sympathy, not for Mason or my parents, but for the unborn child being dragged into their chaos. In a moment of weakness, or perhaps basic human decency, I sent an anonymous gift card for a baby supply store to Vanessa's mother's address, knowing it would reach her eventually. It was the only concession I made to the guilt that occasionally bubbled up in quiet moments. My new life in Chicago was everything I'd hoped for. My job challenged me in ways my old position never had. I made friends who knew nothing about my family history, who saw me as the competent, confident woman I was, rather than the perpetual afterthought I'd been back home. I dated, casually at first, then more seriously with a fellow consultant named David who shared my love of obscure documentaries and spicy Thai food. He had a complicated relationship with his own family and understood my boundaries without me having to explain them in exhaustive detail. 6 months after my escape, I received a letter forwarded from my old P.O. box. The return address was my grandfather's nursing home. My stomach tightened. Grandpa George had always been kind to me, but he'd also been firmly in my parents' corner, allowing them to manage his finances and, I suspected, influence his will in Mason's favor. Inside was a short note in his shaky handwriting. Michelle, I heard what happened. Your mother tells a different story than what I suspect is the truth. I always knew you were the strong one, the smart one. I'm sorry I let your parents convince me that Mason needed more help when we discussed my will last year. They said you'd always land on your feet while he needed a safety net. I see now who really needed protection from whom. I've changed my will. It's not much, but it's something. I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself. It's about time someone in this family did. Love, Grandpa. I cried for the first time since leaving, not out of sadness or guilt, but because someone in my family had finally seen me, really seen me, and acknowledged the truth of my experience. 9 months after my departure, Mason and Vanessa's baby was born, a girl. They named her Michelle, which Jen told me was Vanessa's idea of extending an olive branch. I sent another anonymous gift, this time a savings bond that would mature when little Michelle turned 18. Attached was a note, for college. No strings attached. I might have been done with my family, but I wasn't heartless. That baby deserved a chance, even if her parents were disasters who would likely squander any direct financial support I might offer them. Around the 1-year mark of my new life, my phone lit up with an unfamiliar number. Against my better judgment, I answered. Michelle, it was my mother's voice, tentative and small, so unlike her usually confident tone that I almost didn't recognize it. I said nothing, just waited. Please don't hang up, she rushed. We need help. Your father had a minor heart attack last month. The medical bills. And Mason and Vanessa and the baby are still living with us. We can't. We're about to lose the house. My old self would have immediately started calculating how much I could afford to send them. My old self would have felt responsible for fixing their problems, would have believed their emergencies constituted obligations on my part. But that wasn't me anymore. I'm sorry to hear that, I said, my voice steady. I hope Dad recovers quickly. That's it. No offers of help, no requests for bank account information to wire funds, just a simple acknowledgement of the situation. That's all you have to say? Her voice cracked. Your family is falling apart and that's all you have to say? What would you like me to say, Mom? That I'll bail everyone out again? That I'll give up my life to fix problems I didn't create? The silence stretched between us, heavy with unspoken accusations and ancient hurts. We're your family, she finally whispered, as if that explained and excused everything. No, I replied, the truth of it settling into my bones. You're Mason's family. I was just the backup plan, the safety net, the one who would always land on her feet while you poured everything into him. I heard her sharp intake of breath. Who told you that? Was it your grandfather? Does it matter? It's always been the truth, hasn't it? She didn't deny it, which was answer enough. I have to go, Mom. Take care of yourself. I hung up and blocked the number. That evening, my company offered me another promotion, this time to our international office in London. I accepted without hesitation. The distance felt right, like another layer of protection between me and the toxic patterns I'd escaped. The night before my flight, I sat on my Chicago balcony with a glass of wine, watching the lights reflect off Lake Michigan. The air was crisp with early autumn, carrying the promise of change and new beginnings. I thought about the girl I'd been, always hoping for approval, always willing to set myself on fire to keep others warm. That girl was gone. In her place was a woman who understood that real family doesn't drain you dry and call it love, that boundaries aren't selfish, they're necessary, that sometimes walking away isn't giving up, it's finally allowing yourself to move forward. I'd lost a family but found myself, and in the end, that was the better trade. I raised my glass to the Chicago skyline, to new beginnings, to the power of saying no, to the unexpected freedom that comes from finally putting yourself first. My phone buzzed with a text from my new London flatmate confirming my arrival time. Tomorrow would bring a new city, new challenges, new opportunities to build the life I deserved. My family had expected me to be their eternal safety net. Instead, I'd become my own. They expected me to set myself on fire to keep them warm. Instead, I walked away and built my own fire, and I was never going back to the cold again.